Hi, I'm Dr. Chika Esiobu. It is my utmost pleasure to present this keynote speech during this year's Africa News Conference. It is an honor to share this esteemed platform with other great scholars of Africa. And I wish to extend my warmest regards to the organizers of the Africa News Conference for their unwavering support to the study and understanding of the continent of Africa. My presentation is titled Deconstructing and Reconstructing the African's Mindset, Strategies, Platforms, and Projected Impact. My postulation here will be that there is need for a deconstruction of the mindset of the African because the foundation of knowledge construction in Africa is majorly antagonistic to the African's advancement. The reconstruction that will follow this deconstruction will focus on objective and reality-based knowledge creation. This proposed reconstruction will utilize several platforms, including formal, informal, and non-formal education, media, governance, and policymaking, religion, and entertainment, to mention few. Permit me to start by telling a story of a personal experience I had with the construction and reconstruction of knowledge and mindset. To tell this story, I first have to say that I owe and dedicate this keynote speech to the late Professor Suleiman Nyang of Howard University in Washington, D.C., who taught me while I was studying towards my doctorate. So one day in 2009, I walked into Professor Nyang's office with a strong feeling of heaviness. My mind was weighed down with worry. At that time, I was working on my first historical fiction manuscript, which was based on the story of Olaudah Equiano, the former slave who wrote a widely celebrated autobiography and whose work led to the birth of the slave narrative genre. So I had traveled to the field to gather information prior to having to go to Dr. Nyang's office, of course. I had traveled to the field to gather information. I had invested hundreds of hours doing archival research across different libraries. And it was during the course of my archival research that my problems started. The challenges that led me to Professor Nyang's office on that fateful day in 2009. What happened? The manuscript I was working on covered the 50-year period between 1750 and 1800. And during the course of my research, the materials I could find were mostly written by European explorers. I mean, if not entirely, written by European explorers and missionaries. The language was overwhelmingly negative and derogatory of the African people it described. Reading through the materials in search of information from that era to write my manuscript left me really upset, bordering on depression. I would read text of Africans being described, using the most vile language. This went on for over hundreds and hundreds of pages that I had to read. These texts, reading through them became a burden. And mind you, these were texts that the world read and believed about Africa at that time and for so many years. Some will say even till date. But worse is that it was from the same text that Africans were taught about themselves when education was introduced to Africa. So these texts form the foundations of what is being taught in Africa today. And as a matter of fact, what is being disseminated around the world. It was so depressing reading those texts that I seriously contemplated ending the research and by extension the book project I was working on. I entered Professor Nyang's office that day with that heaviness of spirits and I explained my predicament to Professor Nyang. Professor Yang looked at me, and his countenance was set. You know, he looked. I saw fire in his countenance, and he said, "Chika, you have to work with what you have. If those materials are all you have and all that is out there, then take it." And he said, deconstruct it and try to reconstruct it to reflect your objective and unbiased view of the Africans of that era. Wow, I had my answer. I left Professor Yang's office that day feeling like water was poured over my parched throat. I went straight to the library from there, I remember, ready to take on the most negative, the most disparaging, and the most depreciating narrative I could lay my hands on about Africans. And I was so determined to work it around until I would wring it free of all traces of untruth and present the world with as much unbiased information as possible about the Africa of that era. The experience of writing before we set sail taught me that as far as knowledge construction in Africa is concerned, there is need for a deconstruction of what has been inherited or copied and pasted onto the African's mindset. The task of deconstructing knowledge in Africa surprisingly has never been actively pursued in the history of the continent for so many reasons. And what we find out is that much of this imported knowledge is shallow in its understanding of the continent's challenges and therefore can only proffer peripheral solutions that are at best band-aids on a festering sore. Africans have to become experts in the art of the construction and reconstruction of knowledge, as was taught to me by Professor Dr. Suleiman Yang. At the end of the deconstruction process, a reconstruction is to be carried out that will be aimed at the generation of an entirely new way of understanding life and our lived realities as Africans, leading to an unrestrained period of advancement for the rest of the sub-region and the world at large. So let us break things down a little bit. In the field of education, for instance, we are looking at a situation where country by country, region by region, district by district, subject by subject, curriculum by curriculum, education is reassessed to determine what is needed, what is not needed, and what needs to be introduced. Africa needs to re-examine her structure of education and determine what will work for Africa and Africans. Questions that should be asked include how knowledge can be effectively transferred to the younger generation and how critical consciousness can be built in this generation at a cost that is affordable to the state. The deconstruction and reconstruction of formal education in Africa will require understanding of Africa's indigenous knowledge systems, which is foundational in building the education the continent needs at the least possible cost. In the deconstruction and reconstruction of knowledge about governance systems and mechanisms in Africa, questions must be asked about the affordability and unworkability of the kind of democracy Africa inherited from the former colonial authorities, or Africa is today actively trying to copy from the West. What does democracy mean for the African, down to the grassroots? How can Africa fashion democratic processes, systems, methods in ways that will ensure widespread participation, considering that the continent's existing realities, including geography, social psychological disposition, demography, and economic realities differ significantly from that of the West. The average African country might not need as much legislators as are in existence today across the continent. It's so expensive to maintain, that model of democracy as it is practiced today across the continent. So one thinks of a situation where in this digital age, where many Africans now have access to their cell phones, to the internet through their cell phones, might African countries consider making their parliament a digital exercise with limited in-person contact? A situation where professionals who are fully engaged in their careers, and even market women, and just regular people who are noted to be responsible members of community, who are respected. In Rwanda, such people are called the Nyangamugayo. That is, people who have worth and respect in community, are in some way elected into these offices. They still hold their jobs, they still hold their careers, they still do their businesses, but they become elected officials who put in a few hours a week, into governance via the internet, digitally. In conclusion, the reconstruction of the African's mindset is all about building a generation of Africans that will dare to invent the future. A generation of Africans whose idea of progress is generated from a paradigm of respect for what is authentically African. It is these reconstructed African minds that will create new education models, governance models, business and leadership models, healing and wholeness methods that the world so desperately needs at this time. It has been scientifically established that mindsets, like habits, are built or imbibed over time and can be reversed. One thought, one action, and one interaction at a time. Africans must now set to task at a reconstruction of their mindset from a place of distrust and disrespect for what is African to that of respect, validation, and originality. If I may borrow some words from the great Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba of Congo, he said that we know that Africa is neither French nor British, nor American, nor Chinese, nor Indian. Africa is African. Therefore, Africa's liberty and dignity must be expressed in the words, thinking, and decisions of Africans. And that will come when Africa deconstructs the present mindset that pervades in favor of reconstructing on originality and authenticity. I thank you for your time and attention. Asante sana.